Every era has its monsters. Some wore crowns, some commanded armies, and some ruled with fear so complete that their names still make us shiver centuries later. These are the men who blinded armies, turned cities into graveyards, and built empires on bones. Today, we'll travel through 1,000 years of terror, uncovering the most infamous villain of each century. 12 villains, 12 centuries, one timeline of terror. And to begin, we start with the year 1000, where a Byzantine emperor earned a name so brutal it still echoes on the battlefield. Basil II, the Bulgar slayer in the thousands. The 11th century was the age of empires, and few rulers were as feared as Basil II of Byzantium. He spent most of his reign locked in war with the Bulgarians, a fight that spanned decades, but his legacy comes from one single unforgettable act of terror. After capturing 15,000 soldiers, he didn't ransom or enslave them. Instead, he ordered them to be blinded. Groups of hundreds were sent home, 99 fully blinded, one left with a single eye to guide them. Imagine the sight, thousands of broken men stumbling through the countryside, a human message of despair. When the Bulgarian Tsar Samuel saw his mutilated army, he reportedly suffered a heart attack and died days later. Basil's cruelty worked. Bulgaria collapsed, and Basil secured his empire's dominance. His brutality earned him the name Bulgar Slayer, a title etched into history. But Basil's reign was only the beginning. Because if you think blinding armies is evil, wait until you meet a king who may have ended the lives of his own nephew to secure the throne. King John of England in the 1100s. The 12th century gave us one of the most despised kings in English history, a monarch whose very name became a symbol of tyranny, King John. Unlike the heroic figures immortalized in legends of Robin Hood, John's rule was marked by treachery, greed, and cruelty. John came to the throne in 1199, but his rise was shadowed by whispers of betrayal. Many believed he had a hand in the suspicious death of his young nephew, Arthur of Brittany, a rival claimant to the crown. Though never proven, the suspicion alone was enough to taint his reign. Once king, his behavior only confirmed the fears of his subjects. He imposed crushing taxes to fund his wars in France, exploiting nobles and peasants alike. His heavy-handed rule led to rebellion among his barons, who eventually forced him to sign the Magna Carta in 1215, a document meant to limit his power and guarantee rights. Instead of being remembered as a strong ruler, John went down in history as the very model of a failed and hated king. His tyranny shaped English law forever. But the next century would bring a conqueror whose brutality was measured not in betrayals or taxes, but in millions of lives lost. Genghis Khan from the 1200s. The 13th century belonged to one man whose name still inspires both awe and fear. Genghis Khan, rising from the harsh steppes of Mongolia, Temujin, later crowned as Genghis, united scattered tribes into the largest land empire the world has ever seen. His rise was fueled by charisma, cunning alliances, and ruthless ambition. But his path to power was drenched in blood. Genghis Khan perfected the art of psychological warfare, using terror as his most powerful weapon. Cities that resisted were often wiped off the map entirely. Chroniclers estimate that up to 40 million lives were lost during his campaigns, a staggering number that reshaped demographics across Asia and Europe. In some regions, entire populations vanished. His brutality wasn't random. It was psychological warfare. Submit and live. Resist and be annihilated. Stories of his cruelty spread faster than his armies, causing entire cities to surrender without a fight. Yet, paradoxically, he also established systems of trade, communication, and law within his empire, proof that even history's greatest villains can leave legacies beyond destruction. And yet, if Genghis Khan's empire claimed 40 million lives, the next conqueror perfected terror as spectacle. 1300s, Timur, Tamerlane. The 14th century's most feared conqueror was Timur, better known as Tamerlane. Born in Central Asia, he rose from obscurity to carve out a vast empire stretching from Persia to India, claiming to be the heir of Genghis Khan's legacy. But where Genghis built cities and trade routes, Timur left behind wastelands and terror. His conquests were infamous for their savagery. After capturing cities, he built literal pyramids of human skulls after conquests. Monuments designed to frighten survivors into submission. In Delhi alone, some accounts claim he killed 100,000 captives in a single day. The psychological impact of his campaigns scarred entire regions, ensuring his name would be whispered in fear long after his armies moved on. Yet, despite the devastation, he also patronized the arts and architecture, building a glittering capital at Samarkand that masked the rivers of blood it was built upon. But if pyramids of skulls sound horrific, the next villain invented something even more grotesque. A punishment so disturbing that entire armies surrendered rather than risk becoming part of his human display. 1400s, Vlad the Impaler. The 15th century gave us a ruler whose cruelty became the stuff of legend. Vlad III of Wallachia, remembered today as Vlad the Impaler, defended his small kingdom in present-day Romania with tactics so gruesome they inspired the Dracula myth centuries later. Vlad was a master of fear. When enemies invaded, he didn't just fight them. He staged nightmares. His most infamous punishment was impalement, a brutal method that left victims suffering for hours, sometimes even days. He lined entire roads with these bodies, creating what eyewitnesses called forests of the impaled. It was both execution and psychological warfare, meant to paralyze his enemies with terror before the battle even began. Though celebrated by some locals as a fierce protector against the Ottoman Empire, Vlad's reign left behind scars of horror that eclipsed his military achievements. His name became a byword for cruelty, carved into folklore as Dracula himself. And yet the next villain didn't need legends to stain his legacy. His fury was so uncontrolled that in one violent outburst, he murdered his own son with his bare hands. 1500s, Ivan the Terrible. The 16th century crowned Russia's first Tsar, Ivan IV, better known as Ivan the Terrible. At first, his rule promised reform. He modernized Russia's army, expanded its territory, and strengthened centralized power. But as paranoia consumed him, Ivan transformed from ruler to tyrant. His most infamous creation was the Oprichnina, a ruthless state policy that gave him absolute power and unleashed squads of enforcers who spread fear across the land. These black-clad horsemen terrorized towns, merchants, and peasants alike on Ivan's orders. Entire cities like Novgorod were left in smoldering ruins after his wrath. The darkest moment of his reign came in 1581 during a violent quarrel with his heir. In a fit of uncontrollable rage, Ivan struck his own son with a staff, ending his life. That act not only destroyed his dynasty's future, but also immortalized Ivan as a symbol of unchecked fury. The next villain carried his fury outward, targeting anyone who dared to worship a foreign faith. Tokugawa Iemitsu from the 1600s. The 17th century in Japan was ruled by the Tokugawa shogunate, and one man, Tokugawa Iemitsu, ensured its dominance through a policy of fear and isolation. As the third shogun, he believed foreign influence threatened Japan's unity, and he unleashed brutality to keep it out. Iemitsu forced the policy of sakoku, shutting Japan off from most of the outside world. But his harshest actions were aimed at Christianity. Missionaries and converts were hunted down, tortured, and executed in ways designed to terrify. His reign created an era of strict isolation that lasted for over 200 years, shaping Japan's culture and politics. For Iemitsu, terror was a tool of control, and he wielded it without hesitation. Yet while Iemitsu sealed a nation off from the world, the next villain sought to expand his, carving his place in history as the Tiger of Mysore, feared by entire continents. 1700s, Tippu Sultan. In the 18th century, southern India was dominated by a ruler who became both a hero to some and a nightmare to others. Tippu Sultan, the so-called Tiger of Mysore, fierce in battle and relentless in ambition. Tippu fought against the British East India Company with skill and ferocity, but behind his image as a warrior king was a legacy of cruelty that scarred his own people. Tippu Sultan enforced forced conversions on Hindus and Christians, with massacres recorded across his campaigns. Survivors described temples destroyed, families uprooted, and thousands taken as prisoners. His enemies remembered him less as a freedom fighter and more as a tyrant who used religion as a weapon. Nicknamed the Tiger of Mysore, Tippu's symbol of strength came to represent terror in the eyes of those who suffered under him. His legacy remains bitterly debated. Patriot or villain? Liberator or butcher? Yet his cruelty in pursuit of power ensured his place among the darkest rulers of the century. And while Tippu's wrath fell on the people of India, the next villain's cruelty stretched across oceans, leaving more than 10 million dead in the heart of Africa. 1800s, King Leopold II of Belgium. The 19th century saw Europe expand its empires across the globe, but no colonial ruler matched the brutality of King Leopold II of Belgium. On paper, he claimed to bring civilization to Central Africa. In reality, his personal colony, the Congo Free State, became one of history's most horrific examples of exploitation and mass murder. Leopold turned the Congo into a vast labor camp to extract rubber and ivory. Villages were forced to meet impossible quotas, and when they failed, the punishments were barbaric. Soldiers cut off the hands of men, women, and even children to prove bullets weren't wasted. Families were mutilated or executed as warnings, while survivors were left to starve under crushing demands. Historians estimate more than 10 million Congolese perished under his rule, a silent genocide driven by profit. Leopold never set foot in most of the Congo, yet his greed stained the land with suffering on a scale that rivals the worst atrocities of any century. And while Leopold's empire was built on severed hands, the next century brought a dictator whose crimes scarred the entire globe, a man whose name still defines evil itself. 1900s, Adolf Hitler. The 20th century produced many dark figures, but none left a deeper scar on humanity than Adolf Hitler. Rising from obscurity after World War I, he built a political movement in Germany that fed on anger, nationalism, and fear. By 1933, he had transformed himself into Führer, wielding absolute control over a nation that would plunge the world into war. Hitler's crimes are staggering in scope. He orchestrated the Holocaust, the systematic extermination of 6 million people, disabled individuals, political dissidents, and others deemed undesirable. His war of conquest ignited World War II, claiming the lives of more than 70 million worldwide. Entire cities were reduced to rubble, and entire communities erased. What made Hitler uniquely terrifying was how he combined modern technology, propaganda, and industrial efficiency with ancient hatred. His regime turned murder into a mechanized system, leaving behind images of gas chambers and concentration camps that still haunt the human conscience. The 1900s ended with Hitler's name cemented as the ultimate synonym for evil. But as the world entered a new millennium, a different kind of villain emerged. One who wielded terror not with armies or empires, but with a single devastating strike that changed history in one morning. The 2000s, Osama bin Laden. The 21st century opened with a villain whose actions shocked the modern world. Osama bin Laden, born into a wealthy Saudi family, he rejected privilege in favor of radical ideology. Becoming the founder of Al-Qaeda, from remote bases in Afghanistan, he built a network that would alter history forever. On September 11, 2001, his group carried out one of the most infamous attacks in modern times. Hijacked planes struck major U.S. landmarks, and in a single morning, nearly 3,000 lives were lost. The images of smoke and collapse, broadcast live around the world, etched his infamy into global memory. But the story didn't end there. Al-Qaeda bombings in Africa, the Middle East, and Asia left thousands more dead. His reach turned the world into a battlefield, igniting wars that reshaped entire regions and claimed millions of lives in the years that followed. In 2011, bin Laden was tracked down and eliminated, yet the consequences of his actions still ripple today. He proved that even in the modern age, one man's ideology could destabilize nations and leave scars across generations. Well, which of these villains do you think was the worst? Comment below and let me know if you want the honorable mentions list in a part 2. And while you're here, subscribe now and comment below before history erases this video.